IELTS writing test, task 1, static task. This is a task with a single time period. Hi, I'm 𝗙𝗥𝗘𝗘 𝗔 IELTS examiner, author of IELTS books, and I also have the website 𝐈𝐿TSanswers.com, and I have a writing correction service. I've literally corrected thousands of writing tasks, even tens of thousands of writing tasks when working as an IELTS examiner, and also correcting the tasks that my students send in to me. For task 1 academic, I've identified 4 main kinds of tasks that you need to prepare for. We're going to be looking at the first of these today, the static task where there's a single time period. Some of the other task types that you might have seen are tasks with multiple time periods. We'll be looking at that kind next. And then I'm going to be making videos on process diagrams and maps. And then finally, there's a few other kinds of task 1 academic tasks that I want to show to you and teach you how to respond to. I'll make a separate video for those. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at how you can identify a static or single time period task. I'll give you a clue. There's only one time period, or 1 year. We're going to be looking at how you can plan your task so that you can finish it within 20 minutes and also cover all the necessary data. I'm going to teach you how you can structure this kind of task effectively to make it easy for you to write, and more importantly, easy for the examiner to understand. Oftentimes when I get tasks from students, it just looks to me like a bowl of spaghetti. There's all sorts of numbers and percentages and categories, but they're all mixed together in a way that doesn't really make sense to me. And of course, that will send your score down for cohesion and coherence, especially the coherence aspect of that. And it can also have negative effects on your score for task achievement. If you don't structure your task well, it can be difficult for the examiner to assess how well essentially you have responded, how well you have covered the data and highlighted it. And so that could have negative consequences for your score for task achievement. I'm also going to be presenting you with a sample answer that I've written that can illustrate the things that I'm teaching you about how to structure your task. And then for you keen students out there, I'm going to give you a homework task that you can write at home and check essentially that you've understood what I've taught you today. Now, I do have a writing correction service. I'll put a link in the description of the video about that. If you'd like to, you can send me your homework task. I can have a look at it. I can check what sort of problems you might have in your report, give you an indication of what score you would get in a real test, and most importantly, give you some ideas about how you can increase your score and make sure that you get the score that you need in your test. So let's have a look at today's sample task. As you can see, there's only one time period. You'll note that the task instructions says that the data is in 2002, and since it's only 1 year, this means it's a static or single time period task, and that's going to influence the way that we write it. Now, when it comes to planning your task, and you should always have a plan before you start writing. There's a saying, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. So just think about that for a moment. So essentially what it means is planning is really important, and that definitely applies to task 1 academic. And one of the reasons for that is that you only have 20 minutes. So you've really got to use your time effectively. And part of using your time effectively is writing a plan. And in order to be able to make an effective plan, you need to know how to do it. And that's what I'm going to be teaching you right now. For me, when I'm looking at the task instructions, I'm thinking of three things. I want to know what is going to be my overall summary. That's because this is the most important part of your whole report, the overall summary. You need to provide some sort of overall summary to the reader regarding what the data is about. Then the other thing I'm thinking about when I'm looking at the task is, how am I going to separate my data? How am I going to logically separate it into paragraphs to make the data more meaningful to the reader? And then the last thing that I'm thinking about is the data coverage. How am I going to cover the data? And this is really a question about how much data is there. So we've got to kind of zoom out. Imagine something like a camera, and you're zooming out. You want to see the big picture. You want to get some sort of idea of how much data is there. If there's only a little bit of data, let's say 10 to 12 pieces of data, then you're going to need to cover all of the data. All of the data should be included in your report. Because we have enough words, we're allowed to write, or we must write at least 150 words, and this means that around 10 to 12 pieces of data should be described to get to this number. Now, if you zoom out and you see there's a lot of data, this often happens with tables. You might have up to 25 pieces of data in a table. In the one we're looking at today, we've got 15 pieces of data. That still exceeds what I said earlier about the 10 to 12 pieces of data. This means we're going to be under a little bit of pressure to not have a really long report. I don't favor long reports because you've only got 20 minutes. You want to make sure, well, okay, not exactly 20 minutes. You've got an hour for task 1 and task 2. But the sort of approximate time recommended is about 20 minutes for task 1. So we want to be able to finish our report on time. We want to have time to proofread it. This means don't write too much. It's a common mistake I see from students of mine. They write about 220, even 250 words. That's getting to be like the essay that you have 40 minutes for. So you want to be able to keep your reports relatively brief. And one of the ways you can do this, if you zoom out and you see there's a lot of data, that signals to me you need to look for opportunities to combine data together and possibly skip some non-essential pieces of data. I'm going to be teaching you how to do both of these things in this video. It's incredibly important that you learn how to deal with big sets of data. If you only have like 10 to 12 pieces of data, it's easy, just include them all. But as the amount of data increases, we need to start being more selective and either combining data together or just leaving it out. So if you have a look at the table now, you can see the plan that I have made for this task. Essentially, my overall summary is going to be that the first category, the food, drink, tobacco, is the highest for every country, followed by clothing and footwear, and then leisure and education. Then I'm going to separate my data by the categories of expenditure. So that means I'm going to have a paragraph for food, drink, tobacco, another one for clothing and footwear, and another one for leisure and education. this makes sense, right? Because if I take the other option of going by country, I'm going to need 5 paragraphs, and 5 paragraphs is too many, right? I think you could. Sometimes people asking me, well, how many paragraphs is too many? With these task ones, most of them can be written with 2 body paragraphs. I think 3 body paragraphs works quite well. 4 is starting to get to be too many, especially if you're trying to get up to higher scores. I think that you could possibly use 4 body paragraphs, but oftentimes when it's 4, we can look for opportunities to maybe put 2 categories together. So for instance, if I had a 4th category here, wow, that would be a lot of data. But if I had a 4th category, I might put the 2 highest categories together in one paragraph and the 2 lowest together in a body paragraph. Conversely, if I just had 2 categories, then I'd have a paragraph for each category. Then the third thing I need to be thinking about is how much data is there. And with this task, I've got 15 pieces of data. So that's a little bit more than my usual sort of goal of 10 to 12 pieces of data. So that means I'm going to be looking for opportunities to combine data. And you can actually see that with my plan here. So let me just run you through how I'm going to cover the data. So when I get to this first body paragraph about the food, drink, tobacco, I'm going to do it in order of the highest to lowest. Actually, I'm going to do this throughout the report. So each body paragraph is going to be structured from the highest percentage to the lowest. Now, I encourage this. This is a kind of logical approach, right? Highest to lowest, or if you want, you could go lowest to highest. But there should be a logical approach to how you cover the data in the paragraph to kind of avoid the bowl of spaghetti scenario that I mentioned earlier. You need to make sure that things make sense to the reader. Things might make sense to you in your brain with everything that you see, but it's important that you communicate in a way that makes it easy for the reader to follow the data, and highest to lowest or lowest to highest achieves this. So with the first category, I'm going to mention all the data, but what I'm going to do is combine some of it together. So I'm going to cover the highest, which is Turkey, then the second highest, which is Ireland, and then I'm going to group together Italy, Spain, and Sweden and say that they are all a little over 15%. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm using language of approximation. So language of approximation is very, very important for this task. It's words like about, roughly, approximately, just over, just under. We want to use this language effectively to improve our task achievement, and also it's an opportunity to show the examiner you have talent with language and increase your score for lexical resource. Then I'm going to move on to the next category, clothing and footwear, or shoes and clothes, if you want to paraphrase it. Again, highest to lowest. So we've got the highest in Italy, then I combine together Ireland, Spain, and Turkey, and mention that these are all around 6.5%. And then I'm going to highlight that Sweden had the lowest percentage. Then I'll move on to the next paragraph, leisure and education, or recreation and learning. Again, start with the highest in Turkey, then the second to highest in Italy and Sweden, then finally, but by the way, I'm going to leave out the figure for Ireland. I could include the figure, but I just want to show you that you can leave out some non-essential numbers. The key point is I must cover all categories, all 3 categories. I must cover all 5 countries, but I don't have to cover every category for every country. So I'm going to leave out the figure for Ireland. It's 2.21. It's not a highest number or a lowest number either, so it's a non-essential number. Then I'm going to cover Spain and mention that Spain had the lowest. Now, as I said, I'm just leaving out that number to show you. If I were really writing the report and I want to get band 9, I might actually combine Ireland and Spain together and say that they were both about 2%. Right? So I could easily include that figure, but I'm just trying to show you that you could actually just leave it out, and that would be okay. So the examiner is looking to see that you cover the data and that you're highlighting the most important data, and that's always going to be the highs and lows and numbers that are similar for this type of task, this static task, this single time period task. Okay, so that's basically my plan, and once I've got that plan all together in my head, or possibly written down, you could actually write numbers like I've done, and you can imagine that once you've done your plan, it's very quick to write your report. Now, sometimes I get students and they don't want to make a plan. Even I've seen my students in the real test. One day I was a invigilator. I was one of the people in the test room, and I had lots of my students in there, and I was watching them to see if they were making a plan before they started writing. And guess what? Out of 20 or so of my students, only 1 or 2 were making a plan. Now, I've gone over this in class many times, the importance of planning, but only 1 or 2 out of 20. How disappointing for a teacher is that? I emphasize it almost every lesson. Everybody says they understand, then they go into the test room and they don't do it. How do you help people who don't do what they should do that they didn't do? Or something, even that's confusing saying it. You will save time. If you learn how to plan these tasks effectively, and ideally you should spend about 3 to 5 minutes planning. Even up to 5 minutes is okay, all right? Because the plan is going to save you time. You've done all your thinking and brainstorming. Well, not really brainstorming, that's more essays. But you've done all your thinking, all your analysis first. You know how you're going to cover the data. You've done that as a discrete activity, which means it'll be more effective. Now when you come to write your task, you can write it very quickly because you don't have to keep stopping to think, what do I write next? You're going to know already. You can see from my plan, I know how I'm going to write this task. My overall structure is going to be an introduction, and then I'm going to cover category 1, category 2, category 3. So that's a total of 4 paragraphs. Let's start with what we should do in the introduction. My introduction always has 2 parts to it. First of all, you need to paraphrase the title that you're given for the task. So that's going to be sentence 1. Sentence 2 is going to be the overall summary. Now, I know a lot of teachers, and maybe you, advocate putting the overall summary somewhere else. Up to you. Here's the reason why I like it in the introduction. 1, it forms a solid paragraph instead of 2 little paragraphs. A solid paragraph. Secondly, if you run out of time, you want to make sure you've written the overall summary. That's because it's the most important part of your whole report. If you don't write the overall summary, your task achievement will be limited to 5. If you don't write 150 words, you're down to 4. I hope you don't need a high score. So put the overall summary first, in the first paragraph, so second sentence of the first paragraph. This way, if you ran out of time, at least that most important part of the report is done. Another reason, if you leave it to the end, you might forget. So get in the habit of putting it first in the introduction. The only instance where I would not do this is if I just can't see the overall summary, and I've spent 5 minutes planning already and I'm getting worried about the time. I might just go ahead and write the report and hope by the end of it I know what to write for the overall summary. So let's look at the first part of our introduction, paraphrasing the title. Now, when it comes to paraphrasing, we've got 3 options. First of all, we can rephrase words. We can look for words in the title that we can rephrase. Then we want to look for opportunities to change word forms, such as a noun to a verb or a verb to a noun. This is another aspect of paraphrasing, and this feeds into the third way we can paraphrase, which is to move words around in sentences. And this naturally occurs when you start changing nouns to verbs and verbs to nouns. So let's have a look at my the table shows the percentages of consumer expenditure in 5 nations for 3 categories of products and services in 2002. So you can see I've paraphrased the word gives into shows, and spending to expenditure. And then I haven't changed any word forms for this particular task. However, I have changed my word order around a little bit. So you'll notice in the original introduction, the 5 different countries comes towards the end of the sentence. I've shifted that forward. You can see it underlined, and I've paraphrased countries to nations, a really useful paraphrase to remember, because this word countries comes up a lot, so you can use nations. Then we need to give the reader some kind of overall summary of the information. Think of this something like if you could only write 1 or 2 sentences about the task, what would you write? I've written, overall, the largest proportion of consumer spending in each nation was on foodstuffs, beverages, and tobacco, followed by clothes and shoes, and then recreation and learning. So essentially what I'm telling the reader is what the highest categories were for each country, for all countries. And this one works out kind of nice that not only is food, drink and tobacco the highest overall, it's the highest for every country. So I can make that statement. And you might also notice that I've paraphrased some of the key words. But be a little bit careful with paraphrasing, like don't over paraphrase, just look for opportunities. You don't have to paraphrase every word. Like for instance, the word tobacco, I'm tempted to write cigarettes, but the problem is tobacco is a big category and cigarettes are only one kind of tobacco. We could have cigars and we could have pipe tobacco. So it's not really great to go to cigarettes because that's a smaller category than tobacco. It'd be a bit like the instructions say fruit and you write oranges or something, you know. Not all fruit are oranges, not all tobacco are cigarettes. Usually with these static tasks, the overall summary is going to be about highlighting highs and lows, because that's really all you've got with the data. What are the highest, what are the lowest, possibly things that are the same. Then we're going to want to move on to our first body paragraph, and our structure for our body paragraphs are going to be a topic phrase which indicates to the reader which of the 3 categories of expenditure I'm going to be mentioning, and then I'm going to list my data from the highest to the lowest. Now, these topic phrases are really important. For me, it often separates the Band 6 writer from the Band 7 and above. So what you want to do in the topic phrase is essentially tell the reader what the paragraph is about. Now, it may not be a sentence, it might just be a single clause. So that's why I write topic phrase here and not topic sentence. Topic sentences are for the essays, and if you've seen my videos on the essays, you'll know that I put a lot of emphasis on topic sentences. And for these task ones, if you're trying to get to Band 7 and above, then this is one of the ways you can show talent to the examiner. And it actually helps the reader, right? You tell the reader what the paragraph's about, and also kind of, in a way, you're suggesting how the whole report is structured. If I'm the reader, I can know that the first body paragraph is going to be about food, drink, and tobacco, and I can guess that the whole report is going to be structured by spending category and not country. So let's look at our first body paragraph regarding food, beverages, and tobacco. So that's my topic phrase. This is telling the reader this paragraph is about food, beverages, and tobacco, and suggesting that I've structured my report by spending category. And then I go on to give the data. The nation that spent the highest share was Turkey at 32.14, followed by Ireland at nearly 20%. Spain, Italy, and Sweden all spent the lowest at approximately 16%. So this is a pretty nice paragraph, right? I've started off by signaling what the paragraph's about. I've highlighted the highest number and then given details of the middle numbers, not as important, and then highlighted the lowest. So I've got the highest and lowest highlighted. This is what the examiner's looking for higher bands for task achievement, the highlighting of key data. Now, just highlighting the highest is usually enough, but if you can highlight the highest and lowest, for me that's kind of band 8 and above writing. Then we're going to move on to the next body paragraph, and again we're going to start with a topic phrase that sends a signal to the reader to tell them what the paragraph is about. Turning to clothes and shoes, the Italians had the highest figure at exactly 9%. The next highest proportions were by the Irish, Spaniards, and Turks at around 6.5%. The Swedes spent the least at 5.4%. Okay, so again, we've got our topic phrase, we've got our data highlighted, the highest figures highlighted, the lowest figures highlighted, rephrasing to the least instead of like lowest percentage or something like that. You might also notice some skillful paraphrasing. I've paraphrased the countries into the people from the countries. Now, you might not know all of these, but you might know some of them. You probably know Irish. You might not know Spaniards. I think you can also say Spanish. Turks, you probably don't know that. Swedes, you might not know that. Depends where you are and what you know. But if you know any of those, you can use them, right? You can look for opportunities to paraphrase countries to the people from the countries, because it's really the people that are buying these things. I don't think you should try and learn this for all 150 or however many countries there are in the world. I would probably just know how to do that with the most common ones that you see in the test. So that would be something like, we often got USA, so we could have USA, America, Americans. If we've got maybe Europe, then we could have Europeans. And then just if you happen to know the names of people from, China, Chinese, some of them right? So if you can, paraphrase like this where possible. Next paragraph. Finally, looking at expenditure on recreation and learning. The highest level of spending was by the Turks at 4.35%. The next highest was in Sweden and Italy with 3.22% and 3.2% respectively, followed by the Irish at 2.21%, while Spain had the lowest proportion at 1.98%. You'll note that when I'm reading it out, it's kind of, how can I put it? Like these percentages are so sort of precise, 4.35. If you're listening, it's possibly hard to make sense of the data. I think when somebody's reading the data, it's a little bit better. However, another thing to point out, when we combine the data together, it sort of unravels the spaghetti a little bit. It's when you're hearing so many of these specific percentages, it can all just start to stick together, right? You could also use some language of approximation if you want. Let's have a little bit of a look at some useful vocabulary. First of all, you're going to want to work on comparatives and superlatives. So comparatives are where we compare two things, like, what could I show you? It could be like big and bigger. This mouse is bigger than the other one, right? And wish I had a third mouse. Oh, I do. Hold on. I've also got this one, much bigger than the other ones. This is a vertical mouse. So I could say this mouse is big, this one's bigger, but this one is the biggest. So that's a superlative, biggest, and bigger is the comparative. So you're going to want to make sure that you learn comparatives and superlatives and the rules that go with them. Here's a couple of examples from my report on your screen. The nation that spent the highest share was Turkey at 32.14%, and the next one, the percentage in Turkey, was higher than the one in Spain. You're going to want to learn vocabulary for paraphrasing the names of charts. Make sure that you know things like pie chart, table, bar chart, line graph. Typically in the instructions, they just use the word graph. So if you know it's a line graph or a bar chart, bar graph, that's an easy paraphrase, right? So they typically write the graph shows, and then you can write the line graph shows, or the bar chart illustrates if you want. And then you want to learn to just paraphrase some of the common words that come up in these tasks, like percentage could be proportion, or percent, you can go to the symbol, or if they give you the symbol, you can go to the word. Country, nation, we had that before. The UK, the United Kingdom. Now that's not the same as England. England is part of the United Kingdom, but there's other parts. So you can't paraphrase the UK to England. The USA, the United States, America, the EU, the European Union. Now be careful with some of these paraphrases too. These bottom three, the UK, the USA, the EU, note the word the. We don't normally put the with countries. We don't say the America, or the England, or the China, or the Vietnam. We normally don't use the, and the ones that you need to remember are the UK, the USA, the EU. I commonly see these come up in IELTS tasks, and other ones you don't really need to know, but and even if it were in the, I'd expect you to know those, but something like the Netherlands, I wouldn't necessarily expect you to know that one. I wanted to show you the word respectively. Actually, I just took that out of my report. But it is a useful word, and let me explain when and how to use it. So the useful thing about respectively is we can use it to maybe have two countries and then two percentages. And what the word respectively does is tell the reader that the countries match to the percentages in the same order. So we've got here the next highest was in Sweden and Italy with 3.22% and 3.2% respectively. So that means Sweden's 3.2, Italy's 3.2. It's telling the reader the countries and the percentages are in the same order. Now, you could leave that word out, I suppose, and sort of, in that case, you're expecting the reader to assume that they're in the same order. I think it's better if you make it explicit, and respectively is just kind of like one of those IELTS words that you see a lot in reports. Note too the comma. There's always a comma before the word respectively. In terms of grammar, the main thing you could do is change word order. What you don't want is to use the same sentence structure throughout your report. It can make it really repetitive, which has a negative impact in itself, but it also can lower your score for grammar because the examiner is looking for a range of sentence structures, and if you can move elements around in the sentences so they're not all the same, this is one way of showing talent to the examiner. So there's just some examples on your screen, and note the word Turkey and how it's moving around in the sentence. That prevents it being repetitive, avoids repetitive structures. So we've got Turkey spent the most at 32%. The nation that spent the highest share was Turkey at 32%. About 32% was spent in Turkey. The last one's kind of better. You don't need to have like highly specific figures all the time, but since it's not exactly 32%, if I want to say it's 32%, I need to use language of approximation, about. Relative pronouns are always a good idea because they create complex sentences, and these are essential for getting to band 7 and beyond. So let me show you a couple of ways to make those. But by the way, what I mean by a complex sentence isn't a complicated sentence. A complex sentence has a dependent or unfinished idea and a independent or finished complete clause in the sentence. So if you have a look at the first one, the Spanish who had the lowest proportion spent 1.98%. So who here is a relative pronoun. It's used to add information about the subject. The subject is the Spanish. So we've got the Spanish who had the lowest proportion spent 1.98%. And the second one, regarding food, beverages and tobacco, the nation that spent the highest share was Turkey. So again, we're using a relative pronoun that to add information about the subject, the nation, and that it spent the highest share. Now, a good way to check that you understood my lesson today and that you know how to write static tasks is to write one for homework. And you can see on your screen now a task that I've set for homework. It's about coffee buying in 5 Australian cities. And again, it's a static task because it's a single time period. I highly recommend that you write this task, even if you don't send it in to me to check. But if you do want to have me assess your task and give you a score for the 4 grading criteria and also make some recommendations about how to increase it, I'm putting a link to my writing correction service below in the description of this video. Some of you might also be interested in my writing ebook. I'll put a link to that in the description. I also suggest that you can go to my website. I've got lots of model answers for task 1 on my website. And you might also like to subscribe to me so that you get notifications of my upcoming videos. I know you just can't wait to see those, right? Oh, and also you should download the PDF that I've made. I've actually got a document including all the kinds of task 1s that I've identified for the test. I'll put a link in the description to that PDF. It's a free PDF. I suggest you can download it. You can see the model answer for this task, and you can also see some model answers to other kinds of tasks. So make sure you download that, and best of luck for your preparation for your test.